It's my pleasure to introduce my father-in-law, Rabbi Joshua Schreier, who has taught in Midrash Lindenbaum, in Jerisha in New York, and right now he's heading a project translating the Steinsaltz edition of the Talmud. So I appreciate it very much that he's willing to give this talk the same day that he gets off a plane from Israel. I know exactly what the meaning of that is, so thank you very much. Please.
Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. Visit the children, grandchildren. Thanks for taking such good care of them. And hope to have them back real soon, but we're willing to share for a limited amount of time. Okay. I'm sure many of you recognize the title that I gave to the lecture. The lecture has nothing to do with Anna Karenina. Yuli. It does have to do with a family, a very significant family for us as Jews, which things didn't begin all that well, and they got worse as it went on. And just as an introduction to Yaakov's family and some of the problems that they encountered, if we open up, and I'll open up, or I won't open up, in Sefer Dvarim, Perek Kafeh, chapter 25, there's a small parsha, 3 psukim, which sort of capsulizes what went on in Yaakov's family. It begins, Ki tiena leish shtei nashim, if a man has 2 wives, achat ahova v'achat tznua, one beloved and one hated, v'yaldu lo banim ha'ahova v'asnua, and each one of them bore him a son. Lo yuchal levaker et ben ha'ahova al pnei ben hasnua b'chol. He is not allowed to give the rights of the firstborn to the son of the beloved wife, the younger son of the beloved wife, at the expense of the older son of the, and it's a strong word, but hated wife. But rather, he has to treat seniority, he has to treat them in the order that they were born, in terms of inheritance, in terms of rights, etc. After looking through the Parshiot, after looking through the portions of Yaakov and his sons, it seems that that was a reaction to what he did. Because the Torah saw the tragic results of messing around with the order. But let's begin from the beginning. Yaakov comes to Padan Aram, he meets Rachel, he marries Leah, we all know the circumstances. Then he marries Rachel a week later. Then he works 7 years to pay off Rachel. And then Leah starts bearing him children. If you take a look at the names of Leah's children, which you'll see in this week's parasha, it's rather tragic. Ra'ah Hashem kisnua anochi. God saw that I was hating. Atayi laveishi elai. Now my husband will be my companion because I bore him 3 sons. Very unabashedly, she expressed her frustration in naming her children. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't have any children. The maidservants were recruited to bear more children. Okay, eventually 12 boys, 1 girl. And Yaakov's family is heading back to Eretz Canaan. And that's the way this week's parsha ends. In terms of Yaakov, in terms of his personality, Yaakov is introduced to us last week as Ishtav Yoshev Alim, a homebody, as opposed to Esau, who was an action figure. Yaakov was very passive. Other than taking the initiative to get the birthright or to get the Bechorah from Esau by offering him some lentil soup, we don't really see him taking any initiative. The business of stealing the brachot was his mother's initiative. The business about going to Lavan was his mother's initiative, who then convinced his father, and he went there. Yaakov comes to Padan Aram and he meets Lavan, or he meets Rachel. And Chazal say that he spoke with a lot of bravado. He said, "Go and tell your father, Ki achi aviyahu, that I'm your father's brother." And Chazal say, well, he's not his father's brother, he's his father's nephew. Why does it say I'm my father's brother? So the pshat is that achi means relative, not brother. But they say, achiv beramaut. He's going to Lavan and he's saying, Lavan, let your father know that he's not going to be able to push me around. If he tries to trick me, if he tries to swindle me, I'll swindle him right back. Meanwhile, Lavan took him to school. He basically made mincemeat out of him. He promised him one daughter, gave him the other daughter, he promised him one reward, gave him another reward. Finally, at the end of the parsha, we see Yaakov asserting himself. We see Yaakov standing up to Lavan, even though at first he ran away, but when Lavan caught him, he confronted him, under false pretenses to a certain degree, but nevertheless he stood up before him and he said, listen, I've had as much as I can take, I'm not putting up with it anymore, and they end up parting as friends, or at least parting as, they came to it, they made a covenant between them that neither is going to harm the other, and they move on. Then when Yaakov gets to Canaan, he meets Esau, and for all intents and purposes, after his meeting with Esau, all hell breaks loose in the family. First we have Shimon and Levi. After Dinah is raped, Shimon and Levi go and massacre the town of Shechem. Virtually no reaction by Yaakov. Yaakov does react. If you recall, his reaction to Shimon and Levi was, what have you done? We're few and the surrounding nations are many, they're going to kill us. But there was no sense of moral reprimand. There was no sense of calling them to order and telling them that what they did was wrong. They're saying it wasn't the smart thing to do, but there's no sense of it being wrong. A little bit later, we have perhaps one of the most disturbing psukim in the Torah, where Vayishkav Reuven et Bilha Pilegesh Aviv, that Reuven, if we understand the pasuk literally, had relations with Bilha, his wife's, his father's concubine. Once again, and we'll get into this a little bit later, no reaction by Yaakov. Yaakov is concentrating his efforts, all the more so after Rachel died, to furthering his relationship with Yosef, to promoting Yosef as his heir. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef, it was the way Yaakov viewed it. Yosef was going to end. That was basically what he devoted himself. At the beginning of Parshat Vayeshev, when Yosef comes with his dreams, and the brothers react with kin'ah, jealousy, and sinah, hatred. V'aviv shamar et hadavar. He heard it, he reacted, but he didn't internalize it at all. Fact is, when the brothers went to Shechem to herd their sheep, he sent Yosef to them to see how they're doing, which displays a certain lack of awareness of what's going on in terms of the brother's relationship with Yosef. And the question is, how did the family get to be where it was? How did that happen? Now, granted, it started off badly. He ended up marrying a woman he didn't love, and he apparently made no bones about his feelings towards Leah. As I mentioned before, in the names of all of the sons, it plays out that Leah was not only not the beloved wife, but she felt like she was not the beloved wife. Probably not all that great in starting a family. But nevertheless, the question is, what is it that happened? It's very interesting, by the way, and you know, at some point I recommend that you look into it. You have a very similar circumstance with David HaMelech. At one point, David HaMelech, King David's family, also starts going to hell in a handbasket. And there's virtually no reaction on his part. If you recall, his son Amnon raped his half-sister Tamar, and virtually no reaction by David. Because there was no reaction by David, Avshalom, Tamar's full brother, came and murdered Amnon. David sent him to exile in Hebron, which is not really that far away, but again, virtually no reaction by David. Avshalom then rebels against his father and usurps his father as king, or at least attempts to. And virtually no reaction by David. He just goes away, and the people around him are able to ultimately prevent it, but nevertheless. Yoav kills Avshalom against David's express orders. And again, David is distraught, crying, but he doesn't really do very much, or at least not at that point. And much later, right before his death, his son Adoniyahu decides that he's going to be David's heir. David is locked away in a room with Avishag Shunamit, who's tending to his the Chazal say that there was nothing sexual about the relationship, but anyway, she was looking after him, and he was totally oblivious to what was going on. It was only by a pincer movement by Bathsheba and Natan HaNavi that was able to get Shlomo to be the king instead. So, very, very similar reaction, or lack thereof, by David HaMelech to what was going on in his family, Yaakov Avinu to what was going on in his family. With David HaMelech, it's very clear why he acted the way that he acted. Anyone have any idea? Are you familiar with the...
This is David? Why he acted?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was very old, maybe he wasn't really aware of.
Well, that was with Adoniyahu, but in the events before him, he wasn't quite that old yet. This began right after David's episode with Bathsheba and Uriah Hittite. After he did what he did with Bathsheba, and I'm not going to go into that right now, Natan HaNavi came to him, and one of the things that he told him was, Lo yasur damim mi beitecha, meaning your house will be filled with blood. David felt that all that was happening to him, all of the awful things that were going on among his children, were basically his fault. he deserved whatever was coming to him because of what he did with Bathsheba and Uriah. And as a result, instead of reacting and trying to prevent it and trying to fix it, he was looking at it from his perspective and saying, well, I deserve this. And as a result, even though these things kept on happening, he felt, well, I don't really have a right, meaning, I myself was involved in some unsavory behavior. And, I don't really have the moral right to reprimand the children.
David's inaction started to follow earlier, even when Yaakov killed Near, before that was also similar to...
Well, that was... The whole relationship with Yoav is a very interesting one, because Yoav, in addition to being his cousin, was someone who David, I think, feared to a certain degree. And I don't know if that the fact that he killed Avner ben Ner was not a personal problem, it was a political problem. Meaning, David was trying to unite the kingdom. Yoav understood that if David and Avner make a brit between them, make a covenant between them, he's the odd man out. Obviously, part of what Avner will want in return is to be the general, to be in charge. And that's why Yoav killed him. But I'm saying, David, I don't think he had any love lost for Avner personally. His reaction to Avner being killed was very similar to his reaction to Shaul being killed. Which, while with Shaul there might have been something a bit more personal involved, it was basically political. In order to get the nation united, he had to show them that he wasn't the one who was involved in this, and he wanted to. So I would view that a little bit differently, though it's an interesting point. The question is with Yaakov Avinu, we don't really have nothing of that sort. No sense of self-imposed passivity due to some event that took place. I mean, we certainly don't find a Bathsheba and Uriah in Yaakov Avinu's past. And the question is, what is it that led him to be so passive? Now, again, I'm going to be guilty of oversimplification here, but it could be that he subscribed to the young approach to psychology of raising children, and basically saying, well, if you believe in them, ultimately they'll come around to the right way, and it doesn't really matter. You shouldn't really bust their chops over the things that they do, because ultimately they were raised properly, and they'll know what to do. I don't really think that was it. But anyway, I think that if you take a look at Yaakov Avinu, and you take a look at when this began with his children. Now again, part of it has to do with his children coming of age. Obviously, when they're very small, they're not going to start doing all these sort of things. The small children, small problems, big children, big problems. That's old Yiddish saying. So obviously, 7-year-olds are not going to sleep with his concubines. So it could be that just time goes by and the problems become different. But nevertheless, it seems to be that it's more than just benign neglect. It seems to be that there's a type of paralysis which prevented Yaakov, or which prevented Yaakov from reacting to what happened. I believe that the turning point, the paralyzing factor in terms of Yaakov, was his meeting with Esau. Esau came and met him. By the way, just as an aside, Esau is one of the many characters in Sefer Bereshit who definitely should have fired his publicist. I mean, if any of you think of Sefer Bereshit, can you find anything that Esau did wrong?
Said that he was going to kill Yaakov.
Well, first of all, he said that he was going to kill Yaakov, he didn't do it. Right? And it wasn't like Yaakov had provoked that sort of reaction. Right? And even then he said, Yekruvu Yemei Evel Avi, he was going to wait till his father died because he still had... But, B'chol
He didn't tell his parents that he sold birthright. He
okay.
expected blessing anyway.
Again, you know, the selling of the birthright was something that, you know, Esau was a very physical person. And as he put it so eloquently, just give me the food. He would have signed anything at that point. You know,
So you could have gone to court and said I was...
I mean, we're talking about... First of all, I mean, I think the picture that we might be able to get of Esau is not necessarily of a horrible person, but just of a not particularly worthy person. I mean, we're talking about this like active, able-bodied hunter who, you know, is out all day on his own and is incapable of finding anything to eat without buying something for an extremely exorbitant price from his younger brother, a lentil soup. I mean,
you know.
And furthermore, we're talking about someone who God told his mother, Shnei Goyim v'Vina.
V'Rav Yavod Tzayir.
Yeah, V'Rav Yavod Tzayir. Sorry, it's my Bar Mitzvah parsha. I tried to do it. So, V'Rav Yavod Tzayir. So this is someone who God had said ultimately was not going to amount to much. And this is also someone who, his mother, who sort of had experience dealing with unsavory characters, and also had heard this prophecy, you know, never thought much of. So I think, you know, not necessarily an evil person, but just not a tremendously worthy person.
I'm willing to accept that, but if you take a look at Chazal's treatment of Esau,
Right.
You know, he certainly gets a bad shake. In looking through the Torah, I find two things that Esau might have done wrong. A, it says, Vayivez Esau et Abchora, that he treated the birthright with contempt.
He spurned it.
Okay. And the other one is that he married women who his parents didn't like. Vatiena morat ruach liyitzchak l'Rivka. Whoa, that's really, you know, terrible. I mean, of course, nobody here did anything like that. But you know, it wouldn't be the first time. Maybe it was the first time in history. I don't know. But I'm saying, you know, these are at best misdemeanors. We're certainly not dealing here with felonies or anything of that sort. I mean, but just if you think through Sefer Bereshit and Chazal's approach to some of these people, Noach, certainly according to certain opinions, gets a very bad treatment. Lot gets very bad treatment by Chazal. I mean, I think the worst one is Lavan in this week's parsha. I mean, you know, we meet Lavan, and again, I'm not saying Lavan is... Certainly, if I were to shake Lavan's hand, I would count my fingers after I took my, you know. I don't know that I would want to do business with Lavan. I don't know how trustworthy he is. But I'm saying, we all know from the Haggadah what they say about Lavan. I mean, Lavan is compared unfavorably to Paro. Come on.
Neighborhood doesn't do anything wrong.
What?
Neighborhood doesn't do anything wrong. He gets...
Well,
you should know.
when you talk about, you know, Yibor Tzai Lifnei Hashem, you know, there are certain implications there. But yeah, but Nimrod we don't know anything about. I mean, we can't really judge him one way or the other. He's just someone we don't know. Right? But I'm saying, you know, this is all part of Chazal in terms of teaching, in teaching moral lessons. What they basically, it's helpful very often in creating, you know, like in the old westerns, you would have the guy with the white hat and the guy with the black hat. Interesting that the guy with the black hat was the bad guy, but we won't go into that either. But I'm saying, you know, to have very, very clear, you have, in order to accentuate the good, what you have to do is have a bad protagonist in order to, you know, to count as a counterpoint. All right, but anyway, Yaakov's meeting with Esau. He prepares in three ways. Of according to the way Chazal explained at the beginning of Parshat Vayishlach, he prepared by sending a gift. He prepared through prayer, prepared for war, dividing the camp into two camps. And then finally he met Esau. Now, it's sometimes painful reading through that parsha and seeing how many times Yaakov, in speaking to Esau, uses the word avdecha, your servant, and uses the word Adoni, my master. Meaning, perhaps abject humiliation is not overstating what he put himself through in front of Esau. He totally debased himself. There's one pasuk there where Yaakov says to Esau, Ki al ken ra'iti panecha, kirot pnei Elohim v'tirtzeni. Because my communing with you, my meeting with you, it's to me like a meeting with God. Now, in the Gemara Sotah, Chazal derived from that statement that mutar lach nifler sha'im ba'olam hazeh, that in dealings with wicked people, you're allowed to engage in idle flattery. Again, you fear what they might do to you otherwise, so you can lie in order to, try to soften them up so they won't do anything bad to you. Again, I don't have any source for this. I'm just saying, based on my experience in reading that portion of the Torah, after acting that way in front of his sons, in front of his family, and certainly in terms of the chronology of what happened, that is what comes immediately before the Parshat with Shem. I believe that Yaakov had difficulty asserting moral leadership over his family after that. And sure enough, right afterwards, they get to Shechem. Dinah is raped. What's Yaakov's reaction? Nothing. V'charish Yaakov ad bo'am. Yaakov was silent until his sons came back. Now, it's very interesting in the context of that the negotiations with Shechem and Hamor, there's one pasuk here that says, Vayanu bnei Yaakov et Shechem et Hamor aviv b'mirma. Vayanu bnei Yaakov. Why isn't Vayanu bnei Yaakov? Where's Yaakov? He waited for his sons to come back, okay. But the fact is that the sons are conducting the negotiations here. The sons are the ones who are conducting the discussion here. Just to bring an example, in Parshat Chayei Sarah, when Eved Avraham is trying to make a shidduch for Yitzchak with Rivka, and he's sitting and talking to Bituel, and Lavan is also there. At one point, towards the end of the discussion, the pasuk says, Vayam Lavan uVetuel. And Rashi there says, Rashaya v'kafatz la'ashiv lifnei aviv. He was wicked, and therefore he jumped. In Pasuk Nun Hey, a few psukim later, it says, Vayomer achi avi ima. Her brother and her mother said, U'v'toel echad haya. Rashi asks. So they say, Hu haya rotzeh la'akev u'ba malach behemito. Meaning, Betuel wanted to stop the shidduch, and as a result, an angel came and killed him. What does this have to do with what we're talking about? When it says that the son spoke, and not the father, the question is, where's the father? And the answer is, the father was dead. In the case of Bnei Yaakov and Shem, there again we have son speaking. Obviously, because we encounter him later, Yaakov wasn't dead. But for all intents and purposes, he was not a factor. Whether he was sitting there or not sitting there, the fact that the brothers are the ones conducting this, and he's sitting there and doing nothing, is an indication that Yaakov was not involved. And as I mentioned before, after Rachel dies, we have Vahi bishkol Yisrael ba'aretz hahi, vayelech Reuven vayishkav et Bilha pilegesh aviv, vayishma Yisrael. Reuven went and, again, literally had relations with Bilha, his father's concubine. Vayishma Yisrael. And Yaakov heard. Now, if you take a look, I don't know if you can see the way it appears here. Here's where it says Vayishma Yisrael. And then there's a new parasha that begins. What's remarkable about it, it's not the only place in the Torah, but it's what we call a Piska Be'entza Pasuk. Meaning, a new parasha begins in the middle of a pasuk. Usually when you have a new paragraph, it's, at the end of a matter. Here you have a new paragraph beginning in the middle of a pasuk. Now, Vayishkav Reuven et Bilha pilegesh aviv, Vayishma Yisrael, and Yaakov heard, and then there's a pause. And, we're just sitting there during this pause and wondering, oh my God, what must he have done to this kid in reaction to what he just did? This is not a forgivable offense. He killed him. He banished him forever. Who knows what he did? You're sitting there imagining what could his reaction have been. And what was his reaction? Vayu bnei Yaakov 12. And Yaakov had 12 sons. What was his reaction? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And as we mentioned before, that was his reaction when the brothers and Yosef started fighting. He just made it worse with his favoritism towards Yosef. Now, with regard to Vayishkav Reuven and Bilha pilegesh aviv, anyone know what Chazal say about what Reuven did?
They just moved the bed because Yaakov moved to being very le'azgan.
Okay, yefet. Chazal say, Chas v'shalom, Reuven never did such a thing, which is consistent with Chazal's general approach that the Shvatim were tzaddikim and they would never do anything so terrible. Okay. So what is it that Reuven did? So this is what's going on. We mentioned before, Yaakov married Leah. There wasn't a lot of love between them. He married Rachel, and there was a lot. Leah showed signs of a person in an abusive relationship. Not physically abusive, emotionally abusive. Not that I don't believe Yaakov intended it for it to be that way, but that was the result. She felt rejected, she felt hated. And as very often happens in circumstances of that sort, the subject of the abuse creates his own narrative in order to deal with reality. You familiar with the story of the mandrakes? Dudaim? I mean, when we think of mandrakes, it's hard to think of anything other than Harry Potter. But anyway, when Reuven collected some flowers for his mother, because he was her oldest son, and he was very considerate, he was very sensitive to her feelings, and he brought her these dudaim, which had aphrodisiac qualities. How much a son should be involved in that aspect of his mother's life, I'm not going to get into here. But in any case, there was a very close relationship. And Rachel said to Leah, Tni li midudai benech. Can you share? Now listen to Leah's reaction. Ham'at kachtech et ishi velakachat gam et dudai beni? Is it not enough that you stole my husband? That now you want to take my son's mandrakes? Holy revisionist history. Is that the way it happened? That wasn't the way I heard it. Hama'at kachtech et ishi? But again, this is the way, I mean, chronologically she's correct. Who was the first wife? Leah. Who was the second wife who usurped Leah? Rachel. If it wasn't for Rachel, Leah wouldn't be in this position. But again, to read history in that way is very difficult. But again, she was in an emotionally difficult situation. Okay. Time passes. Rachel dies. Leah, her sister, is obviously upset. But on the other hand, Leah understands that now things will be set right. Now, she will assume the position as the number one beloved wife. And, again, sad that it was under such tragic circumstances, but things would be set right. According to Chazal, Rachel dies. Rachel's tent is folded up. There's no need for Rachel's tent anymore. And Yaakov is now going to move his bed from Rachel's tent, which is where he was headquartered usually, to, certainly Leah expected, to Leah's tent. And then he moved it to Bilhah's tent. He preferred Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, over Leah. And take a moment. Try to imagine a more resounding slap in the face to Leah. Leah, who believed that if it wasn't for Rachel, she would have been the number one wife all along. And just shattered. As you can well imagine, by Yaakov moving his bed to Bilhah's tent. Reuven, what is his fatal flaw, his defining characteristic, as comes out in Birkat Yaakov at the end of Sefer Bereshit? Pachas kamayim. What is pachas kamayim? Flows like water. He's impetuous, impulsive. He doesn't think before he acts. He acts instinctively. And maybe another time, but throughout Sefer Bereshit, his instincts were all wrong. He's someone who should think before he acts. So what did he do? He said, Lo yakum velo yeh, this will not be. There's no way that he, Yaakov, can treat my mother that way. We already discussed how sensitive he was to his mother's feelings. So he came, and he took Yaakov's bed, and he moved it into Leah's tent. Chazal explained, he's getting involved in things that he really had no business getting involved in. And as a result, he's condemned. And sure enough, when Yaakov blesses his sons, Reuven is one of those conspicuous in not receiving a blessing, but a curse. Pachaz kamayim, al totar. Al totar, you will not receive your double portion that you deserve as the Bechor. Ki alita mishkevei avich, because it's certainly a compelling explanation that Chazal provided. The problem is, it was inappropriate. He really shouldn't have moved his father's bed. But calling it Vayishkav Reuven et Bilha Pilegesh Aviv, because he moved his father's bed, the Torah refers to him as one who had relations with his father's concubine? I mean, come on, Chazal. You know, you can whitewash all you want, but that's going a little far. Chas v'sholom and Reuven would do such a thing. But why are they calling it that? Why does the Torah refer to him as someone who had relations with his father's wife, if all he did was move the furniture? Reprehensible although it might have been. So, Rav Yaakov Medan, one of the Rashi Yeshiva in Yeshivat Har Etzion, he explained it as follows. The way that I described it up until this point was the tremendous sense of humiliation that Leah felt, the tremendous sense of identity that Reuven felt with his mother, and the fact that he would not stand by when his mother is treated that way. There's another aspect here which can't be ignored. And this goes back to the pasuk from Sefer Dvarim that I quoted at the beginning. It was very, very clear to all involved that Yaakov was grooming Yosef as the next leader of the family. Ben Ha'ahuva. And Reuven was